Welcome back to Mystery Minds, the channel where we dive into the darkest corners of true crime, uncovering stories that shock, intrigue, and leave us questioning the world around us. In today's case, we bring you a chilling and twisted tale, one that shattered an entire community and left investigators grappling with the unimaginable. This is the story of Emily Ward. A tale of innocence turned sinister. This case will leave you wondering, how could someone so young harbor such darkness? And what could drive a child to commit such unthinkable acts? Stay with us as we unravel the disturbing and tragic story of Emily Ward. In the small town of Silver Creek, Oklahoma, a neighborhood's worst nightmare became a horrifying reality when police uncovered a series of brutal murders. At the center of it all was a 13-year-old girl, Emily Ward, quiet, sweet, and utterly unassuming. But what secrets did Emily hide beneath her innocent facade? Silver Creek, Oklahoma, was the kind of town people described as picture perfect. It wasn't large, just a small community tucked away in the countryside, where neighbors smiled at each other on morning walks and front doors often remained unlocked. The neighborhood was home to an eclectic mix of people: Frank and Marla Jenkins, the elderly couple who baked cookies for every new family that moved in; Adam and Grace Miller, the young newlyweds known for hosting barbecues and block parties; and of course, the Wards. The Wards were a quiet family. Laura and Tom Ward worked long hours but made sure to spend weekends with their only child, Emily. Emily was 13 years old, shy and polite, the kind of kid teachers adored. She was small for her age, with pale skin and brown hair always tied neatly in a ponytail. She didn't have many friends, but no one thought much of it. Emily preferred her own company, spending hours in her room drawing intricate sketches or wandering the park with her notebook in hand. To anyone looking in from the outside, Emily appeared to be a normal girl. Her teachers praised her creativity and intelligence, and her parents called her their perfect little angel. But as the fall months crept into Silver Creek, strange things began to happen. It started with something small: pets disappearing. The Thompsons' cat, the Millers' golden retriever, even the Jenkins' bird vanished without a trace. Some speculated about coyotes, while others whispered about pranksters. The neighborhood buzzed with unease, but there was no concrete explanation. Then came the notes. They were cryptic and unsettling, handwritten in jagged letters and left on doorsteps late at night. Phrases like "the end is near" or "they're watching you" sent chills down spines, but most people brushed them off as the work of a bored teenager. Despite the growing tension, no one suspected Emily Ward. How could they? She was the quiet girl, the one who spent her afternoons sketching flowers and birds in the park. Silver Creek was still reeling from the oddities when Halloween arrived. Children roamed the streets in costumes, laughter and candy bags filling the night. It was the kind of night that made people forget their worries, at least temporarily. But the illusion of safety shattered the very next morning. Frank and Marla Jenkins were found dead in their home. The couple had lived in Silver Creek for over 40 years and were beloved by everyone. But when their neighbor stopped by to check on them after noticing their curtains still drawn late into the morning, she discovered a scene of unimaginable horror. Both Frank and Marla had been stabbed multiple times, and their bodies were left sprawled in the living room. The walls were marked with strange, unsettling symbols drawn in blood. The murders sent shockwaves through the town. Investigators arrived quickly, combing through the Jenkins home for evidence. There were no signs of forced entry, no indications of a struggle outside. Whoever had committed the crime had been calm, methodical, and terrifyingly efficient. As the investigation began, the neighborhood was overcome with fear. People double-checked their locks, and some even installed security cameras. But no one could shake the feeling that the danger wasn't over. The police assured residents they were doing everything they could, but Silver Creek would face another blow before they had time to catch their breath. Just 2 nights after the Jenkins' murder, another tragedy struck. Adam and Grace Miller were found dead in their home. Like the Jenkinses, they had been stabbed repeatedly, and the same blood-drawn symbols marked their walls. The similarities were too exact to ignore, and panic set in across Silver Creek. Families locked their doors and huddled inside, wondering who might be next. Unbeknownst to the terrified neighbors, the killer was much closer than anyone suspected. Emily Ward, the quiet 13-year-old everyone overlooked, was watching it all unfold. She remained calm, unbothered by the chaos that had engulfed her community. No one could have guessed the darkness lurking beneath her seemingly innocent exterior. The small town was gripped by fear, and with each passing day, the pressure on investigators grew. What they didn't yet realize was that the trail of clues was leading them to a suspect who seemed impossible to imagine. The air in Silver Creek grew colder as October settled into its final weeks. The murders of Frank and Marla Jenkins had left the neighborhood shaken, but the fear deepened when Adam and Grace Miller were found dead just 2 days later. The crime scenes were nearly identical. Both couples had been killed in their homes, and both sets of walls were marked with the same disturbing symbols drawn in blood. Investigators were now convinced the town was dealing with a serial killer, someone ruthless and meticulous. The once lively neighborhood became eerily quiet. Families who had once gathered for block parties now avoided stepping outside after dark. Curtains were drawn tightly, and porch lights stayed on all night. The Halloween decorations that had once dotted the neighborhood felt like a cruel mockery of the terror that had gripped the town. Some families even packed up and left temporarily, unwilling to take any chances. The investigation quickly became the town's focal point. Law enforcement combed through the Jenkins and Miller homes, searching for even the smallest trace of evidence. The symbols, now central to the case, baffled everyone. They didn't match any known gang markings or religious rituals. A forensic team worked tirelessly to identify fingerprints, fibers, or anything that could lead them to a suspect. However, the killer had left behind no clear traces. It was as if they had vanished into thin air after each murder. Detective Jack Crawford, a veteran investigator with years of experience handling violent crimes, led the case. Crawford had seen his fair share of grisly scenes, but the brutality of these murders unnerved even him. The precision, the planning, and the lack of obvious motive made the case feel like a puzzle with too many missing pieces. He spent hours poring over the details, certain there was a connection between the victims that he hadn't yet uncovered. The media, sensing the magnitude of the story, descended on Silver Creek. Reporters and camera crews lined the streets, broadcasting the chilling details of the case to the rest of the state. Headlines referred to the killer as the neighborhood butcher, a name that only heightened the sense of fear and panic among residents. The story spread like wildfire, and soon Silver Creek became the center of attention for all the wrong reasons. Amidst the chaos, Emily Ward carried on with her usual routine, seemingly unfazed by the tragedies unfolding around her. She still attended school, turned in her assignments on time, and even helped her mother bake cookies one weekend. Her quiet demeanor didn't draw suspicion, and most people assumed she was just a shy teenager trying to process the fear gripping her community. But behind Emily's calm exterior lay something much darker. She watched the news coverage with an eerie sense of detachment, her notebook never far from her side. Hidden in the pages were sketches of the Jenkins and Miller homes, drawn with painstaking detail. Emily had recreated the symbols that adorned the victims' walls, adding her own embellishments and notes in the margins. The neighborhood continued to spiral into paranoia. Rumors spread like wildfire, each one more outrageous than the last. Some suspected a drifter might be responsible, someone passing through town and targeting random homes. Others believed it had to be someone from Silver Creek itself, someone who knew the layout of the houses and the routines of the families living there. Suspicion fell on everyone and no one. Then, something unexpected happened. A neighbor walking her dog near the park stumbled upon a torn piece of paper lying in the grass. It was a drawing, crudely sketched but unmistakable. The symbols from the crime scenes were scrawled across the page, along with a rough outline of what appeared to be a house. The woman turned it over to the police, who quickly identified it as a clue. But where had it come from? And how had it ended up there? The discovery of the paper reignited the investigation, but it also deepened the mystery. The killer seemed to be taunting the police, leaving behind just enough evidence to create more questions than answers. As the days stretched on with no arrests, the fear in Silver Creek began to turn into frustration. Detective Crawford felt the pressure mounting. The town was on edge, and the killer was still out there, lurking in the shadows. But he couldn't shake the feeling that they were missing something obvious, something hiding in plain sight. What no one realized was that the killer wasn't lurking in the shadows. They were right in the heart of the neighborhood, watching and waiting for their next move. The search for the neighborhood butcher consumed the lives of everyone in Silver Creek. The murders of Frank and Marla Jenkins, followed by Adam and Grace Miller, had left investigators scrambling for answers. Detectives were working around the clock, analyzing every scrap of evidence they could find. Yet the killer remained an enigma, leaving no clear fingerprints, no identifiable weapon, and no witnesses. The case was as silent as the small town had become, but Detective Jack Crawford refused to accept that the killer had vanished without a trace. One of Crawford's first steps was to revisit everyone in the neighborhood, conducting thorough interviews to see if anyone had noticed anything unusual. Among the residents questioned was Emily Ward, who seemed calm and composed for a child living through such a terrifying ordeal. She answered every question politely, but there was something about her demeanor that stuck with Crawford. She didn't exhibit the fear or unease seen in others. Instead, her stillness almost seemed unnatural, but she was only a child, and no one could have imagined she might be involved. As the investigation continued, a breakthrough came when the torn sketch discovered near the park was analyzed. The crude drawing of the blood symbols matched those found at the crime scenes, but there was more. It also featured markings resembling a map, pointing to locations within the neighborhood. Detective Crawford compared it to maps of Silver Creek, and while some of the details were unclear, the resemblance was undeniable. The map sent Crawford's team searching the neighborhood again, and they soon discovered something chilling. Near the Miller residence, in a wooded area behind their home, investigators found more torn pieces of paper hidden beneath a pile of leaves. The fragments were delicate, damp from rain, but what they revealed deepened the mystery. The sketches on these papers were far more detailed, elaborate recreations of the crime scenes, including the symbols on the walls and even furniture placement. It was as if the person responsible had been documenting their crimes step by step. The sketches were disturbing enough on their own, but the precision and attention to detail made them even more unnerving. Each drawing showed knowledge of the crime scenes that only the killer would have. The question was how these papers had ended up scattered in the woods. Had the killer dropped them intentionally, or had they been lost by accident? Either way, it gave Crawford and his team a fresh lead. Crawford ordered his team to investigate everyone who lived near the park and woods. The Ward family's home was one of many they reviewed, but nothing about the initial search raised any red flags. Emily's parents described her as a quiet, creative girl who loved to draw. They were cooperative and seemed genuinely concerned about the safety of their neighbors. For now, their house was dismissed as just another stop on a long list of interviews. The investigation hit another turning point when the sketchbooks themselves became a focus. Detectives showed copies of the drawings to art experts and local teachers, hoping someone might recognize the style. Emily Ward's art teacher was one of the people contacted. She took one look at the sketches and noted a disturbing similarity to Emily's schoolwork. She explained that Emily had a talent for detail and frequently filled her notebooks with elaborate drawings, some of which featured dark or eerie themes. The revelation stunned Crawford. Could a 13-year-old girl really be the neighborhood butcher? The idea seemed too far-fetched, but he couldn't ignore the mounting coincidences. With a warrant in hand, Crawford and his team returned to the Ward home, this time for a closer look. Inside Emily's bedroom, they found what they had been searching for. Tucked away in a hidden drawer of her desk was a notebook filled with sketches. Each drawing depicted scenes of violence that mirrored the Jenkins and Miller murders. The blood symbols, the positioning of the victims, and even the expressions on their faces were captured in haunting detail. What was even more disturbing was a folded piece of paper inside the notebook. It was a map of Silver Creek, almost identical to the one found in the park. Certain houses were marked with red X, two of which aligned perfectly with the homes of the Jenkins and Millers. But there were more sets on the map, marking other homes in the neighborhood. Crawford felt a chill as he stared at the map. Whoever had drawn it had plans for more victims. The case that had baffled the entire town now had a suspect, but the suspect wasn't an adult lurking in the shadows. It was a 13-year-old girl who had remained unnoticed, blending seamlessly into the community she had terrorized. As investigators began to piece together Emily's hidden life, they realized they were uncovering something far darker than they had anticipated. The discovery of Emily Ward's notebook changed everything. It was the key investigators had been searching for, a chilling window into the mind of someone capable of unspeakable acts. Detective Jack Crawford couldn't shake the unease he felt as he flipped through its pages. The level of detail in the sketches was extraordinary, but what struck him the most was the cold, calculated precision of each drawing. There was no emotion in Emily's work, only methodical recreations of violence. The notebook contained more than just drawings of the Jenkins and Miller murders. There were additional sketches, each one depicting homes around Silver Creek. Every sketch followed the same pattern, with crude representations of blood symbols and imagined crime scenes. But the most alarming detail was the map tucked inside the notebook. The red cess that marked the Jenkins and Miller homes were joined by several others, indicating future targets. Crawford and his team now had to tread carefully. The idea of a 13-year-old being responsible for such brutal murders was difficult to believe, but the evidence was mounting. Emily Ward had left a trail that couldn't be ignored. Forensic analysts began examining her notebook for fingerprints, while another team started piecing together her daily habits. Investigators reached out to her teachers, neighbors, and classmates to get a clearer picture of who Emily really was. What they uncovered painted a picture of a girl who had mastered the art of blending in. Emily was polite and quiet, never causing trouble or drawing attention to herself. Teachers described her as gifted, particularly in art, though her work often leaned toward darker themes. Classmates mentioned that Emily kept to herself, spending most of her time alone or sketching. No one suspected her of being anything other than an ordinary teenager. As investigators dug deeper, they discovered something that added another layer to the mystery. The missing pets that had plagued the neighborhood in the weeks leading up to the murders were tied to Emily. A search of her room revealed a box hidden beneath her bed containing collars, tags, and small bones. It was clear that Emily's fascination with death had started long before the murders began. The pets had been her first victims, a chilling precursor to what was to come. Crawford's team began to focus on the timeline of events leading up to the murders. They reviewed security footage from the days surrounding the killings, hoping to place Emily near the crime scenes. At first, the footage revealed nothing unusual, but then a breakthrough came. A grainy video from a neighbor's doorbell camera showed a figure walking near the Jenkins home on the night of their murder. The figure was small, wearing a hoodie that obscured their face, but the gait and size matched Emily. The evidence was overwhelming, but Crawford hesitated to act without absolute certainty. He knew the weight of accusing a child of such horrific crimes and the backlash it would bring if they were wrong. But as the team combed through more footage and analyzed the sketches, every thread pointed back to Emily. The final piece of the puzzle came when forensic analysis of the blood symbols at the crime scenes revealed something that couldn't be ignored. Traces of ink were found mixed with the blood, matching the type used in Emily's art supplies. Investigators compared the strokes of the symbols to her sketches and found them identical. The conclusion was inescapable: Emily Ward was the killer. Despite the mounting evidence, there was one question that haunted Crawford and his team. Why? What could drive a 13-year-old to commit such calculated acts of violence? The answer remained elusive. There were no signs of abuse or trauma in Emily's life. Her parents were loving, her home life stable. Yet something dark had taken root within her, growing unnoticed until it was too late. The arrest was carried out quietly, under the cover of night. Police officers arrived at the Ward home with a warrant, carefully avoiding attention from the press and neighbors. Emily was taken into custody without resistance. Her parents were in shock, unable to comprehend what was happening. They pleaded with investigators, insisting there had to be a mistake. As Emily was led away, she showed no emotion. Her face was blank, her eyes distant. There was no fear, no remorse, only an unsettling calm that unnerved everyone around her. Crawford watched as she was placed in the back of a police car, the weight of the case settling heavily on his shoulders. The nightmare seemed to be over, but the questions lingered. How could someone so young commit such horrifying acts? And what could have been done to stop it before it began? As the town of Silver Creek tried to recover, no one could escape the shadow cast by Emily Ward and the darkness she had brought into their lives. Emily Ward's arrest sent shockwaves through Silver Creek. The quiet, polite 13-year-old girl had been unmasked as the neighborhood butcher, responsible for the brutal murders that had terrorized the town. For residents, it was a revelation that defied logic. How could someone so young, someone they had seen riding her bike or carrying her school books, be capable of such calculated and horrific crimes? The town's sense of safety, already shattered, was now replaced by disbelief and confusion. The news spread far beyond Silver Creek, drawing national attention. The media descended on the town, and headlines painted Emily as a monstrous enigma. Reporters speculated about what could drive a child to commit such violence. Experts debated whether her actions stemmed from a psychological disorder, a hidden trauma, or something more sinister. Every detail of her life was scrutinized, from her quiet demeanor to her macabre artwork. The Ward family became unwilling celebrities, their lives turned upside down as reporters camped outside their home, desperate for a comment. Inside the police station, Emily remained unsettlingly calm. Psychologists were brought in to evaluate her, searching for answers that might explain her actions. What they found was deeply unsettling. Emily displayed no remorse for what she had done. Her responses were cold and detached, as if she were describing events she had merely observed, not orchestrated. When asked why she committed the murders, Emily offered no clear explanation. Instead, she spoke about how she had been curious to see if she could get away with it, as if the lives she had taken were pieces in a game she had been playing. Investigators continued piecing together the timeline of events leading up to the murders. Emily's notebook became the central piece of evidence, its pages revealing a chilling level of premeditation. The sketches and maps showed that Emily had been planning the murders for months, studying her neighbors' routines, drawing layouts of their homes, and perfecting the details of her crimes. The symbols she had drawn on the walls of her victims' homes were later revealed to be entirely meaningless, another layer of her calculated effort to confuse investigators and mislead them into thinking the murders had a deeper motive. The trial of Emily Ward became one of the most sensationalized cases in the country. Legal experts debated whether she should be tried as an adult or a minor. Her age and the sheer brutality of her crimes created a moral and legal quandary. Public opinion was fiercely divided. Some viewed her as a cold-blooded killer who deserved the harshest punishment possible. Others argued that she was a child in need of rehabilitation, a product of a system that had failed to notice the warning signs of her behavior. During the trial, prosecutors presented the evidence in chilling detail. The jury was shown Emily's notebook, the sketches, and the map of Silver Creek with its marked targets. They heard testimony from her art teacher, who described Emily's fascination with dark and violent imagery. Forensic experts detailed how the symbols at the crime scenes matched Emily's drawings and how her art supplies contained traces of the same ink found in the blood symbols. Every piece of evidence pointed to her guilt, but what left the courtroom silent was Emily's demeanor. She sat through the proceedings without emotion, her face a blank slate that betrayed no fear, regret, or even satisfaction. Her defense team argued that Emily's actions were the result of an undiagnosed mental illness. Psychiatrists testified that Emily displayed traits of psychopathy, including a lack of empathy and an inability to connect with others on an emotional level. They claimed that her crimes were not acts of pure malice, but rather the result of a mind that viewed the world differently. This argument, however, did little to sway the jury. After weeks of testimony, the jury returned with their verdict. Emily Ward was found guilty of all charges. Because of her age, the court opted for a sentence of life in a psychiatric facility rather than a prison. It was a decision that left many divided. Some believed she had escaped true justice, while others hoped that treatment might uncover the root of her actions and prevent future tragedies. Silver Creek tried to move on, but the scars Emily left behind were deep. Families who once trusted their neighbors now lived in fear, double-checking locks and questioning the motives of even the most innocent-seeming interactions. The Ward family moved away, unable to face the stigma and pain of living in a town that associated their name with horror. Emily's story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that monsters don't always hide in the shadows. They can live among us, unnoticed in the most unassuming forms. For those who had once considered Silver Creek their haven, life would never be the same. The chilling question lingered. Was Emily an anomaly, or could someone like her be hiding in another quiet town, watching and waiting for their turn to strike? Thank you for watching Mystery Minds. If this case left you questioning the boundaries of innocence and evil, let us know your thoughts in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that delve into the darkest corners of true crime. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a new episode. Until next time, stay safe and stay curious.